Hey Wargamers, the Tau Index for 10th edition is finally here. We have the entirety of the rules at our fingertips, and we know what the Tau will look like as we start 10th edition. So in this video today, we are going to talk about that index. We'll do a full index review, look at the potential strengths and weaknesses of different units and different rules, and touch on some of the options you might elect to take given this index. Now, all of this is within the context of us not having points yet, so a lot of what is good and what is bad within a particular role will really depend on those points. Those points will influence the relative strengths or weaknesses of units. And so we can talk about the general concepts of units and general concept of rules. That's what we're going to do in this video, is kind of have that first pass look at things. And then in the future, we will do some point efficiency analysis, some math hammer, and do more in-depth unit reviews once the entirety of the rules are apparent to us, and once we get a bit more feeling for how things are playing on the tabletop. So join me as I go through the new index and explore the wonders of the greater good. Now, two of the most important rules for your army as a whole are the army rule and the detachment rule. Now, we only have one detachment, the Kauyon detachment, and so these are the rules you're stuck with until we get a codex. But as far as the army rule goes, that's for the greater good. We won't talk about this too much because I've already gone over it pretty extensively when the faction focus came out and this rule was previewed. But for the greater good basically says that when you go to shoot, you pick two units. One of those units is a spotting unit, the other is the guided unit. The spotted unit picks another target for the guided unit. It says, hey, shoot at that thing. And if you shoot at that thing, you get +1 to your ballistic skill. And if the spotter has a marker light, they also get ignores cover. So a pretty powerful buff just through that mechanic. However, there is a catch. If the guided unit splits fire and shoots at something else, they get -1 to hit that alternative target. So a pretty steep cost too for deciding to not shoot at the thing that your buddies are saying you should shoot at. The detachment rule for Kauyon basically gives you sustained hits 1 on turns 3, 4, and 5. And if it's guided by For the Greater Good, they have sustained hits 2. So the potential for 2 additional hits on a critical in turns 3, 4, and 5 if you have For the Greater Good, which is pretty darn good, especially for these higher power weapons that are going to be delivering quite a punch. You can get, if you crit on something that typically only has 1 shot, you're getting 3 for the price of 1, which is a massive increase in value. Of course, drones are a huge thing for Tau, and in this edition, they are massively changed. Drones are now essentially just war gear, and when we had the faction focus, Games Workshop gave us this preview of 5 different drones. At the time, I thought, hey, there are definitely going to be more drones than just this, right? But no, this is the whole list. All the other drones are unit specific. These are the only drones that can be taken by more than 1 unit. On top of this, some drones have been removed. For example, the shielded missile drone is just totally gone. That doesn't exist anymore. Many drones have been folded into unit abilities, so like the interceptor drone, the stealth drone, the sniper drone, those are all just folded into their owner's profile in one way or another, and so they don't really exist, but they're still referenced at least. And then this as a whole really just makes drones far less of a thing in the army. So as much as we've been conditioned to look at drones as being a critical component of Tau, that is no longer the case. They are not something that are quintessential to the functioning of the army. And as you build your army, you probably want to think very critically about whether or not you even need to bring a drone with a particular unit. It's not something that you're going to automatically do depending on how much they cost, right? If it's a trivial amount of points, then maybe you do just take them. But if they have a pretty steep cost associated with them, you're going to have to think very critically about how you are using that unit and if that cost is justified for that particular role in your army. Looking at unit composition, looking at many of the rules that are in the index depends a lot on leaders. And so I thought it would be helpful to pull out who all the leaders are before we get into upgrades and stratagems and unit compositions and that sort of thing. So as far as leader goes, commanders have leader. They can join Crisis Battlesuits. That's it. There are no bodyguards anymore. Crisis Battlesuits are the only thing that commanders can join. There's no such thing as bodyguards because all Crisis suits are inherently bodyguards because they can only be joined by commanders. Darkstrider is a leader. He can lead a unit of Pathfinders. He can't join a Strike Team or Breacher Team, for example, though, which is a deviation from some of his previous iterations. Cadre Fireblade can join Strike and Breachers teams, so can Ethereals. Aun'shi can join Strike and Breacher teams as well, but he also has the really interesting ability to join Kroot Carnivore teams as well, and Shapers, of course, can also join Kroot Carnivores. Notably, the Kill team, the Farstalker kin band, is in here as well, but they cannot be joined by a Shaper. And in 10th edition, you can give leaders upgrades, whether those are really what we would call relics or warlord traits. It's all kind of blended into the same thing. So for the ones that are available to us here in the index, we have Exemplar of the Kauyon that allows the unit to benefit from the Kauyon detachment rule, essentially the sustained hits thing, on turn 2 instead of turn 3. So that's a pretty big leap forward, is you only have one turn where you don't have sustained hits. That's pretty darn cool. And so that's always going to be a win. That is probably going to be really useful on like a Crisis Commander or a Fireblade, where you have a volume of fire associated with it. Precision of the Patient Hunter allows a Tau Empire model to add 1 to the hit roll, and from the 3rd battle round on, add 1 to the wound roll as well. That's something that's kind of it's good, but it's really only useful on one character. So it's probably really only useful on a commander, and so adding 1 to hit, good, especially because commanders have essentially a reduced ballistic skill now. Adding 1 to the wound roll, also good, but it's still just one model, so keep that in mind. Puretide Engram Neurochip is excellent. It says you can put this on a Tau Empire model. Once per turn, you can use a stratagem on this bearer's unit, even if you have already used that stratagem on a different unit this phase. So that means you can use Strike and Fade, which we'll talk about in a moment, Coordinate Engagement, Overwatch. You can use all of those stratagems that are really powerful twice per turn. And that is awesome. That is very, very good. You will almost always want this on probably a Crisis Commander, but not exclusive. And then the final upgrade is through Unity Devastation. This one is pretty good as well. It says that when a model is leading an observer unit, until the end of the phase, ranged weapons equipped by models in their guided unit have the lethal hits ability while targeting their spotted unit. So if you put this in a unit that is observing, they can basically give lethal hits to the unit that they're spotting for, to the guided unit. And that's really useful for everyone, but especially going to be a big force multiplier for units that generally are more on the volume of fire end of the spectrum. So things that have lots of low strength, low AP hits are going to get a lot of value out of this, because those are hits that normally wouldn't make it through a lot of different targets. Lethal hits bypasses some of the durability of those targets, and therefore you get a lot out of this. It's going to be particularly good in Pathfinders for a reason we'll talk about when we get to them, but basically Pathfinders can help multiple units at once, and so you are going to get twice the value out of this with Pathfinders than you are putting it into a unit of strike teams or something like that. Moving on to stratagems, we have 6 for the Kauyon detachment here. Of course, when new detachments come out, we will get additional stratagems, but hopefully some of these repeat in multiple Tau detachments because some of them are really darn good. So starting with stim injectors, this basically gives a 6-up Feel No Pain to a Battlesuit unit for 1 CP. That's fine, it's good. You know, a 6-up Feel No Pain is better than no Feel No Pain, but you really need a large volume of fire to make that really pay off, or, you know, you really desperately need to save just a couple wounds to keep an objective or something like that. So, you know, not something you're going to use all the time to broadly increase the durability of your units, but something that will come in handy in particular circumstances. Coordinate to Engage, on the other hand, I think is something that you will want to use almost as much as possible. I think it's a really strong stratagem. For 1 CP, you get to take one of your observer units, and that unit gets +1 ballistic skill when it's firing at the spotted target, and if they have marker lights, they also get ignore cover. So basically they're spotting for themselves, but they don't get any downside for split fire, right? If you are using For the Greater Good and you are the guided unit, if you are the guided unit and you split fire, you suffer a penalty. That's not true here because observer units are different than guided units. So they don't suffer any type of benefit or any type of cost for splitting fire. And so this stratagem actually opens up a lot of units that you would want to be guided to actually serve as observers and split fire without penalty. So I think this is probably subtly very powerful in that regard, because you can have something like a crisis suit unit be an observer here, have them split fire. They still get +1 ballistic skill against the main target, but if you have a couple weapons you want to throw somewhere else, you can do that without a penalty, and then take a unit that you have, homogenous weapon loadout with, and have them be the guided unit and still get +1 for the whole thing. So it's a really elegant way of dealing with this, and I'm excited and a little surprised that this stratagem exists. So I think this is a really good way to deal with For the Greater Good, and something I'll be using a lot. Strike and Fade returns its 2 CP, which is pretty expensive, but of course this is really good. You pick a battlesuit unit that can fly and have it jump, shoot, jump. So after they shoot, they can do a normal move. So that is really good, and we'll see some interactions here later on, particularly with the Coldstar Battlesuit, increasing movement of crisis suits. You can, move 12 inches if you have a Coldstar and a crisis suit unit. That is really effective. That you're getting a lot of movement out of that. It's not just 6 inches, it's not 8 inches, it's 12 inches movement if there's a Coldstar in that unit. So that is a really large amount of ground that you can cover there, and so that can keep you out of line of sight, avoiding being charged, or it can help get you on an objective. You have lots of play with this, and Strike and Fade is something you will want to use as much as possible, but again, it's expensive, so there is more of a limit to it. Point Blank Ambush is another 1 CP stratagem, which makes it very cost effective. Basically what this does is improve the AP value of a weapon on a unit by 1 if they're shooting at targets within 9 inches, but you can only use this in turns 3, 4, or 5, so you can't use it turns 1 and 2. Very thematic for the Kauyon detachment. Probably not something that we'll see repeated anywhere else, but it is pretty darn good for 1 CP to get a whole point of AP on a large unit, right? Like if we're using this on breachers, that's going to be great because breachers are always going to be within 9 inches, hopefully, to use their weapon. So that's the type of thing that just makes a lot of sense, but you could use this broadly too, right? Like almost every unit is going to benefit from Point Blank Ambush because AP is generally lower than it was before, and so getting an extra boost in your AP is generally a good thing. Then we have Photon Grenades, again, 1 CP stratagem. You can use this when a Tau Empire Grenades unit is charged, and you basically cause them to take a Battle Shock test and subtract 2 from their charge roll for 1 CP. That's pretty darn good. I really like that, that we're forcing a Battle Shock test. That's always going to be good. Importantly, that's going to remove objective control if they fail that Battle Shock test, and it's going to prevent your opponent from using stratagems against them. So that can, not only make them less likely to harm you, but importantly, if you're standing on an objective, is going to probably defeat the whole point of them, making the charge in the first place. So really nice. You can set some nice traps with this too, right? If you have just a unit hanging out on an objective, they can get charged, use Photon Grenades and kind of ruin your opponent's day that way. -2 to charge, also useful, right? Like if they fail the charge, then too bad, so sad, right? Then all the better. And so this is another go-to pick that you'll want to use as much as you can when you are charged, and you're going to have access to it in quite a lot of different units because a lot of units have grenades. And then wrapping up the stratagems, we have Combat Embarkation. This was the stratagem that was previewed in the faction focus and is really good. Again, for 1 CP, that's a really good bargain. It allows you to take a Tau Empire infantry unit and embark them in a transport if they are the subject of a charge. So basically, you can nope right on out of there. This is super good because we already have a lot of benefits to units in transports in 10th edition. This adds another layer of benefits for having particularly breachers and strike teams next to a Devilfish and allowing them to hop in there and save themselves, basically. So that is awesome. It says that this happens just after an enemy unit has declared a charge, and that's true for both photon grenades and combat embarkation. So I wonder, can you do both? Does doing one automatically mean that you are no longer just after the unit has declared a charge, or could you do both? Because if you could do both, that is really awesome. That's a really nice combo there. But either way, this is going to be something that's really helpful to preserve your units. All right, so the part that you're probably the most excited about is talking about the different unit profiles. And so I'm not going to go and read every line of this to you. You can do that yourself. You have access to the index just as much as I do. But we can go through and talk about some of the most interesting points about each data card. And so that's where we'll start here with the strike team. So the strike team profile is pretty much what we expected. One of the notable things here, though, is that the objective control value is at 2, which is really nice. That means, a 10-man unit is going to have an OC value of 20, and so we are going to be able to have a really nice baseline for contesting objectives just based off of that. When we look at the weapon profiles, the Pulse Carbine has a range of 20 inches and 2 attacks. Has exactly the same strength AP damage profile as a pulse rifle, so strength 5 AP-1 damage. Unfortunately, we don't see anything really exciting about this. We don't see pulse carbines having something interesting happening. We don't see pulse rifles having a AP value or anything like that. But we do see that pulse carbines have that extended range. So you're getting 2 shots at 20, whereas pulse rifles, you have to be at 15 inches to get 2 shots. So that's a notable difference, and does make carbines a little bit more interesting because you do get that extended range on the 2 shots. You're giving up the longer range of the 30 inches, but you're still having that more solid mid-range firing option. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some inclusion of carbines. If we look at the keywords here, we see that they have marker lights, which this is how they're dealing with Shazwees now, is that the Shazwee has a marker light, so the unit has a marker light keyword. That's about all there is to that. And so this suggests that strike teams can again be pretty good in a supporting role, right? They'll have the marker light keyword. They can function as observers using for the greater good and give +1 ballistic skill to a different unit. And you're not necessarily losing that much depending on what's going on the board and where the strike team is positioned. If you have a strike team that's spotting for a unit that's far away or anything like that, you probably want that +1 ballistic skill on a different unit, and so you're not losing out by not having the strike team be a guided unit, right? There's a low opportunity cost there. But if you really do want the +1 ballistic skill, you can use the coordinate to engage stratagem and have strike teams also get that extra benefit. One of the most exciting things about strike teams is that they have this cover fire ability. It says, well, this unit is within range of an objective marker. Each time you select it as the target of the fire overwatch stratagem, hits are scored on unmodified rolls of 4 up when resolving that stratagem. So you're hitting on 4s in Overwatch instead of on 6s. That's awesome. That's 3 times the hits. And there's even more ways you can get more hits out of them through some interactions with things like the Cadre Fireblade. And so that is really strong. That means that they're going to be able to hold objectives surprisingly well, but you still have to pay CP for that stratagem, right? Like there's no way to not pay for the Overwatch stratagem, which is rough. So you still need to have the CP to make that happen. They also have the DS8 support turret ability, which is frankly just boring. Like the solution for turrets here is nothing interesting. You just get the turret weapons if you don't move, and it's essentially a smart missile system version, so it's not really that interesting. It just has indirect fire. It's just boring. So sure, why not? But it's boring. Breacher teams basically have the same stat line as strike teams. The only thing that's different is that they have a different gun. So they have the Pulse Blaster, which is assault, which is nice. Only range 10 inches, but 2 attacks, BS 3 up, strength 6, -1 AP, 1 damage. So This is a simplified version of the Pulse Blaster that we've had before, and it hits on 3-up. That is really appealing. It's only 10-inch range, right? But we have lots of options to get them into that range. So I think Breachers are still hot. They still got it. And so hitting on 3s with this really nice profile is excellent. They also have the ability Breach and Clear. This used to be a stratagem. It's now incorporated as an ability, which is definitely the way to go. So each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack that targets an enemy unit within range of an objective marker, you can reroll the wound roll, right? So you're already strength 6. You're going to be, doing plenty of wounds as is, but if they're on objective, you're going to be re-rolling. So that is very powerful as well. So Breachers, Strike Teams, both looking very good as it is. If you're bringing Breachers, you probably want a Devilfish. You might want a Devilfish for other units too in the army. They're pretty darn good. So looking at their stat line, they are tougher. They're toughness 9 now with 13 wounds. They're ranged weapons. Not that we bring them for their ranged weapons, but they certainly help. We see some interesting inconsistencies in the index. So the Smart Missile system here only has 2 attacks, and a lot of other places it has 3. And the AP value on the Accelerator Burst Cannon here is 0, whereas many other places it's -1. And I don't know if that's because they intend for different units to have different weapon profiles or because of poor editing. But as it is, the burst cannon and the smart missile system here, as they are presented, are a little underwhelming. I much prefer the improved versions that other units have with the same name. So as they are, we'll have to see if that gets FAQ'd or not. Looking at the abilities, it does have For the Greater Good, which is great. It means that it can be a spotter for Fire Warriors, so you can have your Devilfish be the observer in For the Greater Good, and then your Breachers, let's say, be the guided unit. So an excellent combo, and again, does really reinforces bringing a Devilfish with for those infantry. They can be spotters for other units too, but like let's say we have a Breacher unit in here, the Devilfish guides them. Now you're hitting on 2s with your Breachers, which is great. You also have the rapid deployment ability, allows you to disembark after advancing. So the combination between being spotters, having For the Greater Good, and this rapid deployment role, I think just really supports a Fish of Fury playstyle, mechanized playstyle, and there's other units in here that go well with that too, but Devilfish still a strong choice in 10th edition. And then both of these units, Strike Teams and Breacher Teams, can be led by Cadre Fireblades. We're bringing them for their abilities, right? So let's focus on that. They have the Volley Fire rule, which says, well, this model is leading a unit, add 1 to the attack characteristic of ranged weapons equipped by models in that unit. Full stop. That's an excellent buff, right? Adding 1 to the text profile of any weapon is good, but this applies to Breachers now too. It's not just Strike Teams. So you're getting 3 shots with your Pulse Blaster now, and that is awesome, right? So Fireblades, I think, are a staple choice at this point, depending on points. So 3 Fireblades all day, every day, I will take them. I'll take my Fireblades. I put them in my Fire Warrior teams for sure. It has this other ability, Crack Shot. It says like when you get a critical wound, its AP goes to -3. I don't really care. That's not why I'm bringing this guy. That's not a very common thing to happen. I don't care. I'm all about the Volley Fire with this guy though. And if we think about Volley Fire happening with Pure Tide Engram Neurochip, happening with the Strike Team ability to hit on 4s with Overwatch, we could have multiple units of Strike Teams sitting on objectives, overwatching on 4s. And of course, I don't think that strategy should be built around overwatching, because generally overwatching is something that you would prefer not to do. You'd rather shoot an enemy when they're not charging you, or when it's your turn, all that stuff, right? But nonetheless, Nonetheless, that is a really powerful defensive trait. Ethereals can also lead both strike teams and breacher teams, although you probably will take fewer Ethereals than you will Fireblades. Ethereals are massively simplified from their previous version. I had anticipated that they would have something to do with Battleshock tests or leadership, and they don't really, which is disappointing and surprising. But so they have the leader ability. They have failures on option. It says, well, this model is leading a unit. Models in that unit have the Feel No Pain 5-up ability. That's nice, right? Like having a 5-up Feel No Pain is better than a 6-up Feel No Pain. That's good. And having that on your strike team, like in the back of the board, makes a lot of sense, especially because they have this ability called Coordinated Leadership. So Coordinated Leadership says that you roll a die on a 4-up, you get a CP. So you probably want to bring at least one Ethereal, stick them in a unit of strike teams with pulse rifles, sit them on an objective in your deployment zone, and just farm CP with them. That seems like the way to go. He also can take a hover drone, which changes his movement characteristic to 10 and gives him fly, but like, why? Because unless he's alone, he's going to be limited by the movement of Fire Warrior. So, like, that's something that they put in there just because that's the way the model is now. But yeah, so that's not really that interesting anymore because you used to want to have the hover drone in order to keep up with battlesuits. He doesn't really do anything for battlesuits now, so that doesn't matter. He just affects infantry, so there's no reason to really bring a hover drone anymore. Aun'shi is one of the 2 special character Ethereals. He has been a crowd favorite for a long time with pretty underwhelming rules. His rules here seem better, actually, I think, than they have been in the past. His weapon Fidelity has sustained hits 1, 6 attacks, weapon skill 3-up, strength 5 -1, pay 2 damage. That's decent, right? Like that's a fair number of hits, especially depending on how he's costed. But one of the more interesting things are his abilities, of course. He has Inspirational Defiance. It says, well, this model is leading a unit. Add 1 to the objective control characteristic of that unit. And so he can lead strike teams, breachers teams, and Kroot. So adding 1 to the OC characteristic of 20 Kroot can go a long ways. That will give you 40 OC, whereas if you add it to 10 strike team, let's say, you'll get 30 out of that, which is still really good. But you have options here is basically what I'm getting at. And if you put him in with Kroot, he's probably going to be able to use his melee weapons more, but you do give up the ability to put like a Shaper in the unit then if you do that. So that's a trade-off. Probably more likely to see him in a unit of breachers realistically because they are more likely to be charged than strike teams and you still get this benefit. He has Martial Warrior, which basically allows him to customize his weapon on each fight phase with either precision or devastating wounds or sustained hits 2 instead of sustained hits 1. So you can pick which one you like. This makes his weapon better, but you're not necessarily really bringing him for his weapon. You really want that objective control thing improved. So yeah, I mean, he's fine. I think he probably is going to get outshone by either standard Ethereals or Fireblades in a lot of cases, but he is interesting in this new iteration. Speaking of Kroot, let's talk about Kroot. Kroot, still squishy. Their stat line is basically what it was before. They have Kroot rifles, which function basically like they did before. They are hitting on 3-ups in close combat, which is nice. They also have grenades and are Tau Empire units, so they can photon grenade as well. Not just Fire Warriors can photon grenade, so if you want to take away the OC, take away stratagems, -2 to their charge against Kroot, you can do that with the photon grenade stratagem, which is nice. That's cool. They have stealth, which means that they are -1 to hit at range, which is great. That goes a long way to increasing Kroot Carnivores survivability. I think that's probably the biggest change to Kroot is that they just have that -1 to hit natively here, which is really good. They also have Grizzly Feast, which used to be a stratagem. Now it's an ability. It says, after they defeat an enemy in the fight phase, they get a Feel No Pain of 5-up. So that's great if you can grab an easy kill early on in the game. But if the unit is, straggling along, doesn't have very many guys left, that 5-up Feel No Pain is probably coming too little too late kind of thing, right? So if you can pick up a easy kill early on in the game, give them a 5-up Feel No Pain when there's still lots of Kroot left, you're going to get a lot out of that. You'll definitely want your crew to be led by a Shaper. He has the Shaper commands, which allows the Grizzly Feast ability to actually be improved. So instead of not having a Feel No Pain until they eat something, they have a 6-up Feel No Pain natively. And then once they eat something, then it gets bumped to a 4-up Feel No Pain, which is even better, right? So this basically makes a Shaper necessary just because you're going to make your Kroot a lot more survivable with this. He has Ritualistic Feeding. It says each time a model ends charge move until the end of the turn, add 3 to the tax characteristic of its Shaper's Ritual Blade, which already has 3 attacks. You're bumping that to 6. That's fine. Kind of boring. I feel like it's a missed opportunity. You could have done something really cool with Shapers here, I think, but they didn't. So it's fine. But yeah, it seems like a missed opportunity. Krootox Riders slap. So they don't have stealth like Kroot Carnivores or the Shaper, but they do have Scout, just like the other Kroot. So they can hang out with their Kroot buddies. The thing that makes them really cool is their fists, right? That's the reason why they would be cool. So they have 4 attacks in combat, weapon skill 3-up, strength 6, -1 AP, 2 damage. So a solid profile. But if they're within 6 inches of Kroot Carnivore squad, they add 1 to their hit roll. So that means that they hit on 2s in close combat. So you're getting 4 attacks. Hitting on 2, strength 6, -1 AP, 2 damage. That's just a nice little meatball right there. Then you get your Kroot gun 2, strength 7, 2 damage. It's like not really anything to write home about there, honestly. But I think the fists are kind of cool. So if you're looking for a little bit of a counter charge unit, I think Krootox Riders could be your jam. Kroot Hounds kind of suck. I'm not gonna lie. So they're moving 12. They're still squishy. They still bite things, and they are better at biting things than the average pup. So they add 1 to their wound roll when they're by Kroot Carnivores in engagement range. So they're mostly wounding on 4s. That's great. They have Scout. They have Stealth. All that stuff is good and fine and dandy. But it's not enough of a damage source to really matter, and they only have, they don't have an objective control value. Their OC value is 0, and that's kind of a deal breaker for me. So it seems like they don't bring OC to the table. They don't really bring anything novel for damage. The only thing that seems like they would be good at is just screening, right? If you just want some cheap bodies. But they can't grab objectives anymore. That was one of the nice things that they could do before was, hop on an objective or, just kind of mess around with the board. They can't do that because they have OC 0. So these seem like they're mostly here just for screening, if anything. But I'm not sold on them, unless they are dirt cheap. The crew kill team, the Farstalkers, makes the port over to mainline 40k here as well. They have a profile that's very similar to Carnivores. The weapons have different names and that sort of thing. They notably have Infiltrator instead of Scout, so they actually can start the game up the board instead of just having a Scout out from your deployment zone. And they have Stealth, so they're pretty sneaky little fellas. I think the main reason you would bring them, though, is for the Bounty Hunter ability. Allows you to mark a target as your bounty at the beginning of the game, and if you're shooting at that target, you get lethal hits and precision. All the options for war gear, or at least some of them from Kill Team, are here. You still have the specialist weapons like the Skinner and the Tribalist. You still have the Bird. If you take the Bird, you get Ignores Cover, which is a nice, ignores cover, lethal hits, precision, all those things together mean that you could be actually putting it down some really nice precision shots if you are positioned correctly. And so I think it might be worth bringing one unit of these guys, depending on cost, to do some of this stuff early on in the game. But probably sniper drones are going to be a little bit more comfortable choice for a lot of people because of their range and some of their other functionality. So we'll see what the points say, right? But it's nice to see these guys here, and I like the bounty hunter ability. It's a cool twist on the Kroot theme so far. Moving away from Kroot and getting back to mainline Tau, we have the Pathfinder profile, which was previewed for us in the faction focus. One of the interesting things there is that their armor save is actually improved from a 5 up to a 4 up. So Pathfinders finally have the same armor as strike teams and breachers. Looking at their ranged weapons, probably the most interesting thing here is the rail rifle. That has devastating wounds and heavy, so you can hit on 4s with it, and if you get a critical wound, all your damage becomes mortal wounds. So normally you're probably going to be hitting on 4s. Strength 10, minus 4 AP, 3 damage. That's a pretty nice little package there. And especially if you use coordinated engagement, you can have this unit still get +1 to hit, so you could even be hitting on 3s if you wanted with coordinated engagement, which is nice. For their abilities, they scout 7 inches, and they have target uploaded. Again, this is something we saw in the faction focus, that basically they can be spotters for 2 different units, which is very powerful because it condenses the number of units you need to be spotters down. So you don't need to have a 1-to-1 ratio of spotting and guiding units. You can have these guys serve as the observer for multiple units and therefore require fewer observer units and dish out more buffs that way. So a really nice and efficient package there. As far as war gear goes, they have access to 3 different specialist drones: the Grav Inhibitor, the Pulse Accelerator, and the Recon drone. Grav Inhibitor subtracts 2 from your opponent's charge range, doesn't stack with photon grenades, unfortunately. Pulse Accelerator drone adds 6 inches to the Pulse Carbine range, so you're hitting out to 26 inches now instead of just 20. And Recon drones give them the Infiltrator's ability. And unfortunately, you can only take 1, which is different than it has been in the past. It says the Shazwi can pick 1 of these guys, and that kind of sucks. Honestly, I'd rather have all 3 of them. That'd be awesome. But you can only pick 1, and I think it's probably going to be the Recon drone most of the time, because being infiltrators with Scout seems like a really good thing, right? So being able to position exactly where you want to be with these guys is going to be useful. And so I think you're probably going to go with the Recon drone. If not, either of the other 2 are also good. The only person that can lead a unit of Pathfinders is Darkstrider, and he's cool. He's got 2 really nice abilities. He has Structural Analyzer, which adds 1 to the wound roll when he's leading a unit. Unfortunately, that doesn't help with Devastating Wounds because Devastating Wounds only happen on a natural roll of a 6. So that doesn't count here, but does make Carbines and Pulse Accelerators better than they would be. So maybe if you're taking Darkstrider, you want to take the Accelerator drone instead of the Recon drone. The catch-22 there is that he does have the Infiltrator's rule. So if you take the Recon drone, you could infiltrate still with the unit if Darkstrider is in there. He also has the Jammer Array, which says enemy units that are set up on this battlefield from reserves can't be set up within 12 inches of the model, which is super useful, especially if he's infiltrating. You can kind of block out a whole portion of the board with that. So that's really nice. Unfortunately, it's based on him and not the unit that he's attached to. So some of that footprint that you're excluding is already excluded by normal like deep strike reserve rules and the Pathfinder unit on top of it. So you're maybe getting a little less value out of that. That might push you towards just taking him as he is, but then you're giving up on the Structural Analyzer, and I think that's super useful, right? So I probably would rather just have him in with the unit Pathfinders and just deal with it that way. But very appealing. I wouldn't be surprised seeing him on the table, especially because of the Jammer Array, right? Like that type of aerial denial can be really powerful, especially with things like rapid ingress and greater access to deep strike and those types of positioning mechanics. And here it is, the moment you've all been waiting for, the discussion of Crisis Battlesuits. And there's a lot to go over here, right? Like, I have lots of little annotations here. So looking at their stat line, their movement 10, toughness 5, 3 up save, 4 wounds, leadership 7, 2 OC. So basically what we were expecting, they're staying at 4 wounds. And unfortunately that does suggest that taking shield drones to bump those wounds characteristics up to 5 or 6 is going to be a pretty standard choice, I think. Getting a couple more wounds on here is definitely going to be nice. Looking at the weapon profiles, cyclic ion blasters, their standard profile, 3 attacks, range 18, hitting on 4s, strength 7, -1 AP, 1 damage. This could be a really nice place to use or to benefit from Kauyon, right? So if you're getting sustained hits 1 or sustained hits 2 if they're guided, 3 attacks, that has a fairly reasonable chance of proccing sustained hits. So you could get a bunch more hits if you're building under a Kauyon mindset using cyclic ion blasters. And strength 7, -1 AP, that's not a bad profile. Of course, you can take hazardous as well. You can take the overcharge profile and get that to be -2 at 2 damage. But keep in mind, hazardous is now per weapon and will do 3 mortal wounds for each failure. So there's a fair amount of risk associated with taking cyclic ion blasters and overcharging them on battlesuits now. Fusion blasters, only range 12 now. That hurts. That hurts a lot, right? So only being range 12 is not nice, Games Workshop. I don't like that. I think that really is going to limit the amount of use that they get. There's some ways you can mitigate that nerf a little bit, but the 12-inch range is bad news bears. Missile pods, plasma rifles, both looking really appealing here. Missile pod, 2 attacks, plasma rifle 1 attack, but they both have decent strength, decent AP, and especially decent damage. So I wouldn't be surprised to see missile pod, plasma rifle showing back up in addition to maybe a little bit more of a close combat build. So I think there's probably two builds for crisis suits here. One that's going to be close, one that's going to be far, and plasma rifle missile pods probably not going to be a poor choice. Looking at the keywords, this is a pretty massive change. Crisis suits are no longer infantry. They are now vehicles and walkers. There's a little bit of a hint about this based on the web store starting about a week ago or so. But yeah, so they're vehicles now, which means that they can still shoot in combat, but they take -1 penalty to hit if they do. And now, because they're vehicles, they can be shot at while they are in combat. And that's rough, right? Like, if I'm playing against Tau, I'm gonna tar pit a unit of crisis suits and shoot the crap out of them, while they're in combat. That's the way I'm going to deal with them. And so it opens up a massive weakness for crisis suits here, being able to shoot at them while they're tied up in combat, and that's a major issue that we have to figure out. Looking at their abilities, they have turbojets, which means that when they advance, they just move 6 inches. You don't have to roll for it. That's nice, but none of the weapons are assault. So thanks. Yeah. So there's a way around that too, but that's useful, but not as useful as maybe you would hope. Looking at their war gear abilities, you have a battlesuit support system, which allows you to shoot even if you fell back. A shield generator, which gives you a 4-up invuln save. It's nice that it's still at 4 and not nerfed to like a 5. And then a weapon support system, which allows you to ignore modifiers to hit. So you can pick those, and the way that you pick those is, let's look at the back of the card. So weapon and support system selection is the same for crisis suits as is for all 3 variants of commanders. And so it basically works where you start off with a burst cannon, you can place that with whatever you want. You can't take more than 1 AFP or any of the support systems. But you can take duplicates of everything else. And so that means that even Cold Stars can take multiple cyclic ion blasters if they want. But looking at the support systems, it might be worth it to only take 2 weapons and then take 2 support systems, depending on what you're building. So the ability to fall back and shoot is very attractive. The ability to ignore modifiers is very attractive. Those 2 things you might view as being kind of opposite of each other, because one of the consequences of them being vehicles now is that they have the -1 to hit while they're in combat, and so the weapon support system will allow them to ignore that, which is good. So they'll be able to fire at full ballistic skill while in combat, but and so maybe you don't need to fall back and shoot. So those, you might view those as being kind of opposite approaches. But the shield generator is always going to be good too, right? So like having a 4-up invuln save is always going to be good. So maybe you want to take, a weapon support system, a shield generator, and 2 plasma rifles, let's say, or something like that. So again, the exact loadout of the battlesuit is really going to depend on points. I'll get my spreadsheet going. We'll do the math hammer, figure that all out. But as it is, it's kind of interesting that you have these somewhat like they have a condensed version of support systems. It's not exactly what I thought in terms of boiling it all down just to just 1. You still have a couple options here, and so the number of combinations that you have here is exciting, and also kind of a brave new world in terms of crisis suits, because of that massive issue of being able to be shot at while in combat. And so you're probably going to want to lead your crisis suits with a commander. All 3 commanders still are in the codex and are all their own unit entries still. So the classic crisis commander has this profile here. Notably, the ballistic skill on all of the weapons are 3-up, so it's still better than a standard crisis suit, but he's not hitting on 2s natively. You have to use For the Greater Good in order to get him to hit on 2s. I'm not really sure why they did that. That seems kind of mean. But so he's got nerfed to hit on 3s. He has the Crisis Commander ability, which says that each time a model in that unit makes a ranged attack, you can reroll hit rolls of 1. That's fine. Like, that's good. But it's also, a little context dependent in the way that there are probably better options in the other commanders if you need them, right? But his weapon selection works exactly the same way, so he has the same support system options, all that sort of stuff. The Enforcer Commander is only slightly different from the Crisis Commander. He has a slightly tankier stat line, so 2-up save and 6 wounds. And then he has the Enforcer ability instead of the Crisis Commander ability, which basically just worsens the AP value of shots against them by 1, which is good, right? Like, having 1 less AP is good. It's better than it would have been in 9th, because AP is again generally compressed, so you're taking a bigger chunk out of the remaining AP by worsening it by 1. But the Enforcer itself was definitely better in 9th as a whole. But yeah, other than that, everything here is the same as crisis suits and commanders, same weapon profiles, all that sort of stuff. And then we get to the Coldstar, and the Coldstar is really appealing. His weapon loadouts are basically the same, except for he has access to the high output burst cannon as well. High output burst cannon, 18-inch, 8 attacks, 3-up, 5 strength. It's what you would expect, I guess, based on how burst cannons are looking. Like, again, nothing has AP anymore, nothing has that much damage anymore, nothing has that many shots. So 8 shots, respectable. But it's just more strength 5 shooting. Looking at the abilities here, the Coldstar ability is that the unit he leads has a movement characteristic of 12, and all their weapons are assault. Hallelujah, right? So that's how we do that, is by giving our crisis units a Coldstar Commander. They now have the assault ability. They can advance and shoot and it's not a problem. So this does add a lot of functionality to the Crisis Suit unit. And again, if we think about Strike and Fade, then we're having a unit that can move quite a bit and then do another move after that. So the jump shoot jump mechanic with the Coldstar Commander in a Crisis unit is really good. If you have two Coldstar Commanders, and the Puretide Engram Neurochip, allowing you to use the same stratagem twice, then you get 2 units jump shoot jumping crazy amount, and that seems like a really strong combo. And a really good way to keep your Crisis Suits from getting tied down and shot in combat. So something that I'm looking forward to using is a list that involves multiple commanders, multiple Coldstars, I should say, allowing their respective units to jump shoot jump like that. It should be. I think it's going to be something useful. Let's say. Looking at the big man himself, Commander Farsight. Pretty disappointed, honestly. He's fine. He's a dude, but it's tough to envision taking him when you could be taking other commanders instead. So his ranged weapon is just the high intensity plasma rifle. It's basically just 2 plasma rifles strapped together, which is good. I think plasma rifles are good, but it's not novel. The Dom Blade is certainly punchy, so you get either 4 attacks or 8 attacks, strength 10 or strength 6, 2 or 1 AP, 3 or 1 damage. So I mean, it's punchy, but he's also still just one dude. I was hoping to see a little bit more attacks. I was hoping to see like 5 or 10 on those profiles, honestly. But otherwise, and higher AP, to be honest. But yeah, still. He has the Way of the Short Blade, which you add 1 to the wound roll to the unit if they're targeting a enemy within 9 inches. But again, like that's pretty decent, but you give up other leader options. And so this basically signals that Farsight is really intended just to do Farsight bomb stuff, right? So you can deep strike with him, you can deep strike with the Crisis unit. That's what he's intended to do. He's not intended to start on the board and run up the board. Because if you were going to be doing that, you would want a Coldstar or a different type of commander. You wouldn't necessarily want this Way of the Short Blade ability. He also has the Aggressive Offensive. It says once per battle, when the model is selected to fight, you can basically re-roll all your hits and all your wounds, which is great. But these two things together do not an iconic hero make, right? Like it's frankly just not good enough. Where are the rest of the rules? Where's the stuff with the Dom Blade? Where's the stuff with the Talisman of Arthas Moloch, right? Like where's all that stuff? Where's the, fancy movement business with his super cool jetpacks? Where's the advanced AI stuff? Like, where are the rest of the rules? I'm disappointed. So, I think if you're bringing a Farsight bomb, then that's what he's for. But if you're not bringing a Farsight bomb, if you're not trying to bomb something with a unit of Crisis Suits, don't bother. Take a Coldstar instead. On the flip side, the stealth suits look really interesting, particularly as forward observers using For the Greater Good to help other units, more so as a support role than they have been in the past. In the past, they've always had the ability to have marker lights. They've been kind of more of an objective board control type unit, but here I think they offer a lot as observers in For the Greater Good. So their stat line is about what you would expect, no increases to wounds or save or anything like that. They have infiltrators and stealth. So they do maintain the -1 to hit, but it's only at range. That's what stealth does, is it's only at range. Then they have the forward observers ability, which means that if they are the observer unit, the guided unit that's targeting their spotted unit can reroll wound rolls of 1, which is pretty darn good, right? There's not that many wound reroll mechanics, and especially extending this to entire unit that doesn't require any type of special character or anything like that, that's pretty useful. And so if you take a marker drone with these guys, they have the marker light keyword then, and they can still observe if they advance. So there's a lot of really good things about marker drones in stealth suits here. And so I think they're potentially a really solid pick for observers. Pathfinders and stealth battlesuits both offering a lot as observer units, which is really cool. For war gear, they have the battlesuit support system option, just like crisis suits do. They also have the homing beacon, which allows you to use rapid ingress for 0 CP. This is a little bit different than the homing beacon we're used to, right? We're used to having the homing beacon being something really synergistic with crisis bombs and deep strikers and things like that. This homing beacon functions more broadly, being useful for anything that uses the rapid ingress stratagem. So that's good that it's only 0 CP, because you're going to be tight for CP with this army, that's for sure. But I don't know if that's particularly useful in a lot of lists. I think if we're looking at stealth suits, we're looking at them largely for their observer role. The stealth suit's big brother, of course, is the Ghostkeel, and it has a pretty big improvement in 10th compared to earlier iterations. So looking at the stat line, it's pretty chonky, so toughness 8, 2-up save, 12 wounds with 3 OC. So that's a really nice stat line just to begin with. As far as the weapons go, the Cyclic Iron Raker is looking really nice. So that's range 36, 6 attacks, hitting on 4s, strength 7, -1 AP, 2 damage, and then you can overcharge it for hazardous. But the thing is, it's only one weapon, right? So you're getting a lot of shots on one weapon. Hazardous tests are done per weapon, and so you only have to take one hazardous test for this guy, and if he fails, because he's a vehicle, he's only going to take a few mortal wounds. So it's not like you're losing the whole model or anything like that, and with those 12 wounds, you can stand to fail it once or twice over the game. Not a big deal. So that's really nice there. It also works really well with Lone Operative, which is one of his abilities, which means that he can't be targeted outside of 12 inches. Period. So if he's outside of 12 inches, he can't be targeted. The 36-inch range on the Cyclic Iron Raker works very nicely with that, of course. And then it has enough volume of fire that it's going to synergize very nicely with the sustained hits rule of Kauyon. So we're getting some extra hits on here just because we have so many attacks on this too. So the Cyclic Iron Raker is really looking nice on this guy. Fusion Collider, it's one of the few options for 18-inch fusion in the entire index, so that's nice, but I think the Cyclic Iron Raker is still going to outperform it in a lot of cases. If you're looking for that harder punch, I think there's other places you can get it. Looking at the right side of the data card, we already talked about Lone Operator. The stealth drones are now basically just 2 free savior protocols, so twice per battle you can reduce the damage of an attack down to 0. So that's really the only place on the whole index that we see something like Savior Protocols peeking its head out. So that's a good place to have that probably. But yeah, so we're already a pretty durable unit here, right? With the stat line, stealth, lone operator, lone operative, all those things are making this unit really durable. And then on top of it, we have these Saber Protocol mechanics that are really going to be useful here. It has the Battlesuit support system option, but if you take that, you have to give up the smoke keyword, which means you can't use the smoke screen ability, the smoke screen stratagem, but you're really only giving up cover, the benefit of cover in that, and you could get the benefit of cover other ways. So I don't think that's really much of a trade-off. I would take the Battlesuit support system in a heartbeat in exchange for the smoke keyword here. So that seems like a pretty easy sell. And if we're looking at Ghostkeels combined with stealth suits, hopefully there's going to be a detachment in the future that kind of leans into the stealth component of this. But those two paired together, if we're looking at the rerolling ones to hit because of the advanced the advanced observer rule on the stealth suits, that is also going to work really well with the more moderate strength of the Cyclic Iron Raker there too. So you can see some nice synergy here. You can see some opportunities for combos with this, and I'm really impressed with how the Ghostkeel has really stepped up in this index compared to the last codex. Another stealthy boy is the Firesight Team. This is the new combination of the Firesight Marksman and the Sniper Drone team. So those are all one unit again now. And this is another instance of lone operative and stealth being on a data card here. We actually have access to a lot of lone operatives and a lot of stealth in the index, which is nice. So again, I'm not going to be surprised if there's a detachment that leans into that, but either way, those things are appreciated in pretty much any detachment, of course. Looking at his data card here, though, he has 3 long shot pulse rifles, or rather 1 long shot pulse rifle that is attack 3. And so that's not that's not great, right? That's only 3 shots for the one dude. I really would have liked to see this be a higher number of shots, but hopefully the pricing is right so that volume of fire is appropriate. They're natively hitting on 4-ups, but they are 3-ups if stationary and 2-ups if guided. So you can get some nice accuracy here, and they have precision, which is really a great source of precision, given that, again, there's a 36-inch range on this, and it's a lone operative with stealth, right? Those are pretty safe shots, and so you can allocate those in a pretty confident way, right? You don't have to play too cagey with this. You're going to be able to pick your targets and allocate some nice strength 5, -1 AP, 2 damage shots to some characters, hopefully. So I think that's not bad. And again, depending on pricing, this could be a really useful element of an army to pick out all the characters, because as we're seeing with this index and with others, characters mean a lot for the functionality of army, and having something like the long shot pulse rifles in your army is going to be really useful. They have the precise targeting ability, which means that they're going to be hitting on 2-ups re-rolling if they're guided. So it says, well, this model is guided. Each time it makes an attack that targets its spotted unit, you can re-roll hit rolls, right? So again, re-rolling 2-ups on a guide, if you're staying stationary, that's decent, right? So that's really giving you more opportunity to land those shots. And hey, if you mix that with the stealth suits, right, you can reroll 1s to wound, and look, you're getting even more value out of those shots. So the Firesight Team seems like a really good inclusion on the surface. Piranhas aren't stealthy, but they are sneaky. I think Piranhas are one of the more interesting changes in this index. So their profile, their range weapons, nothing really too exciting there, right? Movement 14 is nice. 7 wounds is nice. That's all great. I think the burst cannon is still probably the way to go with these for the most part, but you have your seeker missiles here, right? And your seeker missiles are the same seeker missiles as you have on any other unit, and they are hitting on 4-ups just like every other unit. So you aren't really giving anything up by putting a seeker missile on a Piranha versus, let's say, a Hammerhead or a Devilfish. You're not losing out on anything. There's no opportunity cost there, which is different than what it had been in the past, right? In the past, if you put seeker missiles on something, you really want to make sure they are on kind of your best chassis. Here, that doesn't really matter. Like, they're all the same, so you might as well put them wherever you can. And so the Piranha is actually a really good option for putting seeker missiles on. And if they stay at something like 5 points, I would expect Piranhas with seeker missiles to be a common sight. So that's pretty cool. As far as their abilities go, they have this thing called drone harassment tactics, which is, I think the word is cheeky. It says at the end of your movement phase, select one enemy within 12 inches. That enemy must take a battle shock test. So you're just bugging the crap out of a unit with your drones. And I love that. That's kind of amazing, right? And again, depending on how these are costed, that could be a really effective thing just to mess with people. And having some Piranhas on the board to literally harass your enemy, I think that is something that is worth thinking about. Vespid Stingwings are another unit that is pretty cheeky in the index. They got a nice upgrade. The stat line, the Neutron Blaster, all that is about what you would expect. Vespid are going to Vespid, man, and you can't stop them from doing that. But the cool thing here is this Airborne Agility ability. It basically says at the end of your movement phase, you can throw them back into strategic reserves. And importantly, that's at the end of your movement phase. So you can do some kind of, cheeky stuff in the movement phase, potentially like triggering your opponent to use Fire Overwatch or, respond in some way that you can take advantage of, right? But then just say, oh, you know what? Never mind. They're actually going to go into a strategic reserve. So you can be really cagey with these guys. You can fall back out of combat and then do it. So these guys are probably worth an inclusion just for being so maneuverable, right? You can drop them on an objective, have them do something, then, yoink out of there and, go somewhere else next time. So that is really useful on the face of things. And even though they're not going to necessarily take a lot of damage, they have a nice punch still, and you can pull them back up. So you can, again, play really cagey with these guys, and I think that they'll get some more attention than maybe they have in the past because of that. Broadside Battlesuits. Now, again, the stat line here is largely what we expected. 8 wounds, 2 up save, OC of 2. All that is, about on par with what we've seen earlier in the index. Looking at their weapons, both of them look good. So you have a heavy rail rifle, which is heavy, so you can hit on 3s if you don't move, with devastating wounds, so your critical wounds turn into mortals, and then the high yield missile pod is twin linked, meaning you get to reroll your wounds with it. The heavy rail rifle has 2 shots, the high yield missile pod has 6. It'd be nice if that was a little higher, but 6 is still good. And so both of these look attractive because you can get a fair amount of damage out of each of these, really. So I think that's promising, right? Like, we've had periods in the past where it's been strictly one or the other is the way you want to go. Here, again, I think both of these look good on the surface. As far as abilities go, they have advanced armor, which gives them a 4-up feel no pain against mortal wounds, which is kind of weird. Like, I don't necessarily understand why that rule is included for this unit, but that's great, right? If somebody throws something with devastating wounds against this, or psychic power against these guys, which is bound to happen because they're kind of a big scary unit, it's good to have that feel no pain. It's just a little strange that it's so particular. For war gear, they have battlesuit support systems and weapon support systems, just like crisis suits. But you get to pick. Pick those, of course. And I think probably the weapon support system is going to be the way you're going to want to go, because you're going to be ignoring modifiers. That's going to be useful in a lot of different scenarios, not just when you're in combat. And that works very well too with the twin smart missile system, which is indirect fire. So if you fire the smart missile system as indirect fire, that's a negative modifier to hit. You're going to be able to ignore that using the weapon support system, and so you're really only giving them cover because of indirect fire, which maybe isn't going to make a difference. Maybe it will, but yeah. So I think smart missile systems with the weapon support system are probably going to be the baseline, and then you're going to mix that with either the rail rifle or the high yield missile pod, depending on the rest of your army. So Broadside's looking really nice. So are Riptides, though. Riptides have a pretty tough stat line: toughness 9, 2-up save, 14 wounds, OC value of 4, and then they also have a built-in 4-up invulnerable save. So their shield generator gives them a 4-up now again, which is welcome. Of course, they're going to need it. And then their movement is 10 inches, but there's no built-in boost. There's no Nova charge ability that allows them to run across the board or anything like that. So even though they have a pretty good movement characteristic in 10 inches, they are fairly less mobile than you are probably used to because of that. Looking at their ranged weapon, the heavy burst cannon looks pretty good. 12 attacks, strength 6, -1 AP, 2 damage. that's that's a nice little package of damage there. The Ion Accelerator, I was hoping to see maybe a little bit stronger, but still a solid number of shots. And again, just like we saw with the Ghostkeel, the Ion Accelerator, 6 shots, you're only taking 1 hazardous roll there. So overcharging is not that big of a deal for a Riptide. Now, we're looking at the Fusion Blaster, Plasma Rifle, Smart Missile Systems. Those are all basically what we have come to expect based on other units. For keywords, they don't have towering or anything, so they still benefit from obscuring. They're still easy to hide and move and everything like that. So they're basically, again, just a big crisis suit. We don't have to worry about line of sight as much with them or anything like that. Looking over at their abilities, they have built-in support systems. So they have a built-in battlesuit support system and a weapon support system. You don't have to choose. They just get both of those automatically. And then the Nova Charge has changed to be once per battle in your shooting phase, you can select one ranged weapon equipped by the model and give it devastating wounds. So that is excellent on the burst cannon, right? Like getting 12 shots with devastating wounds, that's really solid. Hammerheads are definitely tougher than they were in 9th edition. They're now toughness 10, and so that's a good change. But overall, I feel like they probably are a little lackluster. I think a lot of the things you'd want a Hammerhead to do, you can probably find better chassis to do that with throughout the index. But let's take a look more specifically here. So looking at the Accelerated Burst Cannon, again, we see the -1 AP profile here. I'm not sure what the deal is with that. But the Ion Cannon, again, looking decent. So D6 plus 3 shots for the Ion Cannon here. Not bad. And of course that's blast, so you're going to get more value out of it against larger targets. The Railgun is a massive disappointment that it doesn't have anti-vehicle and anti-monster on it, but it is heavy. It does have devastating wounds. It is strength 20, so you can certainly pack a punch with it if you so choose. And they have Seeker Missiles too. As far as abilities go, it has Armor Hunter, which means that you get to add 1 to the hit roll when you're targeting a monster or a vehicle, which is not the same thing as being anti-monster or anti-vehicle, of course, but it's better than nothing. The targeting array allows them to reroll 1 hit or 1 wound when resolving attacks. So, if you're taking the railgun, you're going to want to use that, of course, to make sure your 1 shot goes through. But yeah, overall, I mean, pretty comparable to what they were before, with a pretty major caveat of the railgun not being the major source of mortal wounds that it once was, or at least a much more variable source of mortal wounds compared to its 9th edition incarnation. Longstrike is the Hammerhead special character. He's not a leader, but you kind of can think about him that way. If you bring Longstrike, you probably will want to bring at least one other Hammerhead, because that's probably where more of his value is in helping other Hammerheads. Again, the Accelerated Burst Cannon AP 0 here for some reason. I don't know why. The Railgun is hitting natively on 3-up, and so if you take the Railgun with Longstrike, you're going to be hitting on 2s if you don't move. So that's pretty good. Everything else about him is the same though, right? He has Armor Hunter, he has targeting array just like the standard Hammerhead. One of the things that does make him different is the XVO2 Pilot Battlesuit ability. This basically says that you can pick a Hammerhead gunship that's within 12 inches, and until the next command phase, it has lethal hits. So that's going to be more useful on an Ion Cannon Hammerhead. Any of the support systems really are going to be helped by that as well. But the lethal hits are going to have a bigger chance of proccing on an Ion Cannon, and also are going to be more useful for an Ion Cannon because of the profile on the Ion Cannon compared to the Railgun. Railgun doesn't need that much help. So the lethal hits on the Ion Cannon is probably more of a value there, and really the reason why you'd bring him. I think overall though, not super exciting. Again, if you're going to be bringing Hammerheads, you might as well, but I would not be building around Longstrike any day soon. Skyrays are the sometimes neglected step cousins of the Hammerhead, and the Skyray I have really mixed feelings about this guy right here. The big thing here is that it has the Seeker Missile Rack, which only has 3 attacks. That's not a lot, right? But they are the kind of new fancier version of a Seeker Missile, right? So it's strength 14, minus 3 AP, D6 plus 1 damage. That's a nice punch, right? Like that can do some damage. And so, having only 3 shots, is kind of, I would much rather prefer it to be more, of course. But 3 shots is kind of on the edge where I'm not sure if it would be just better to take Seeker Missiles piecemeal. Like if you have, a few Piranhas or a few Devilfish, would just be better to just throw some Seeker Missiles on those guys. And yeah, you're not going to be able to shoot 3 every turn, but maybe that's good enough. I don't know. I have really mixed feelings about this. I wish this had, maybe 4 or 5 attacks. Then it would be a really easy sell, I think. As far as abilities goes, it has aerial scanners, which means you can re-roll the hit against targets with fly, and targeting array does the same thing as it does on Hammerheads, re-roll 1 hit or 1 wound. It does have the marker-like keyword, though, too, so it does serve as a potentially really valuable long-term source of a marker light observer, because it is fairly durable. It's going to stay on the board for at least a little bit, and it has a marker light, so you can get some value out of it as an observer in that way too. So maybe the combination of a decent weapon with this support role makes it kind of better than maybe it looks on the surface. Speaking of the sky, let's talk about the flyers. So the Razorshark Strike Fighter is probably much better than it was earlier. So the thing here, right, it basically has all the same stuff as it did before. The profile is better. It's toughness 10 now, with the 3 of save, 12 wounds. Like that makes it much more durable than it was before, which is good and needed it. But one of the more interesting things is that the quad ion turret, again, has standard overcharge profile, but it's twin linked, meaning you get to reroll your wounds, and it has 8 attacks. So that's the same thing that I've said, with the Riptide and the Ghostkeel now. That's a lot of overcharging attacks that you only have to take 1 hazardous test for if you want it. And the fact that it's twin linked, allowing you to reroll your wounds, like that's not a bad gun, right? Like that's some pretty decent output there. It has the ability of ground strike fighter. So if you're targeting something that doesn't fly, you add 1 to the hit roll, which even better, right? So now you're hitting on 3s with that thing. It does have for the greater good, so you could spot for this to hit on 2s, which is again nice. So like I think there might be some value here in the Razorshark, depending on how it's costed. Like the quad ion turret is kind of cool now, I think. The bomber is relatively worse. So the Sunshock Bomber only toughness 9 instead of toughness 10. So we are losing some durability in the bomber, which probably is thematic. It has twin ion rifles. It has 2 of those. Basically, these are the replacement of the interceptor drones, and that's the only mention you get of interceptor drones. I guess they technically don't even mention it, but that's what they are. That's what those ion rifles are. And you get 6 attacks here, split across 2 sets of weapons. So you actually have to take 2 hazardous tests for only 6 shots. The profile is the same as on the quad ion turret, and as far as strength, AP, damage, and so like that is a flat out worse deal than the quad ion turret is. If we're looking at the abilities, it has the bomb ability, which is simplified. You just roll 6d6, and on a 3-up, the target suffers 1 mortal wound. So that's better if you're going over like a dreadnought or something. You want to do a few mortal wounds, but it's not as good for a larger variety of units. So I think that it's a simplified version of the bomb roll that has different play, not necessarily worse play, but not a ton of mortal wound generation there either. So I think the Sunshock Bomber comes out looking relatively worse for wear in this upgrade. So I heard you like guns, and so the Stormsurge has those. It has lots of guns. It has lots of different guns, just like it always has, and its profile looks pretty attractive. It's toughness 11, 2-up save, 20 wounds, OC of 6. Like that's all pretty solid stuff. As far as the range weapons go, things are basically where you would expect them to be. The Pulse Blast Cannon looks really nice. Right, you're getting a good volume of fire here, and you have flexibility. You can either do the focused or dispersed versions of the gun, and notably that's potentially more attractive than the railgun because the railgun is stuck at one profile. There's no submunition option anymore. There's no stratagem for that. There's no way to have the railgun do submunition shots. So it's stuck at one shot, one kill, whereas the Stormsurge has some flexibility in it. Now, Stormsurge doesn't have devastating wounds with the blast cannon, unlike the railgun, which I guess would be the one way that you could get a submunition-like effect is with devastating wounds on the railgun. But the blast cannon looks like a really solid choice. Put that on top of all the other options that are here. It just seems like you're really getting a lot of damage output from the Stormsurge. It has support systems built in, and if you're doing Titan stuff, you can reroll the hit roll. So it seems like a good a good big unit in the army if that's what you need. And it has a built-in 4-up invuln save too. So it's moderately hard to kill and can pack a punch. What else is there to say? Tactical drone units are still a thing. They are the only drones that count as models in your army, but I don't know why. Right? Like they have a OC of 0. That's not surprising. They're twin pulse carbines. Yeah, they can shoot, but like I don't think you're probably not going to need. Like if you wanted that shooting, you probably would just take gun drones on a different unit or strike teams or breacher team. You take something else, right? So I don't really get why these are even still here. Maybe just for screening, right? You could take 3 tactical drone units just to take up board space, and if they're dirt cheap, I guess why not? But again, kind of like it's not clear what role these guys are supposed to play in the army. All right, and then the last 2 data cards that we'll talk about are Aun'va and Shadowsun, because we've gone through the whole army now. You have a sense of what the army is. I guess I'm not going to talk about the shield line because it's not really. I don't think it's worth talking about, frankly. The Aun'va is Aun'vaing it up here. Basically does the same thing. It seems like he's almost impossible to kill. He has lone operative, so you can't shoot at him outside of 12 inches. That's very good for being the space pope. You don't want you want him to be secret. You want him to be safe. So lone operative, very good. He also has duality shield. Says once per battle you can give him a 2-up invuln save. And so between lone operative and that, plenty of longevity. Paradox of Duality says that it's -1 to hit and -1 to wound against him. Again, more survivability. And Supreme Loyalty allows you to add 1 to battle shock tests for Tower Empire units within 6 inches, which is good. And I really thought that was going to be a mechanic that we just saw in Ethereals generally. So, I'm glad that it's at least here. Aun'va could be a really important inclusion with that in mind, but isn't necessarily. Like most of his abilities are just about having him stay alive. This is only one that you actually get some value out of. So we'll see. 6 inches isn't a huge bubble either. So it could be useful, but it also might just be might be kind of a trap into having you position poorly or things like that, having to work around Aun'va. So we'll have to see. But at least he has that Supreme Loyalty aura, and it showed up somewhere. All right, and the final data card is Shadowsun herself. Toughness 4, 3-up save, 6 wounds, 1 OC. She has nice leadership, which is good too. 6-up is good. For her range weapons, she only has one option for her Fusion Blaster now. She used to have 2 different versions that she could pick from. Now she only has one, but it's good. It's an 18-inch Fusion Blaster. Yay! And she has 2 of those. So you get 2 18-inch Fusion Blasters, hitting on 2s, strength 10, -4 AP, 6 damage. Yeah, I like that. She has Agile Combatant, which means that she can shoot in a turn that she fell back. She has Hero of the Empire, which is an aura that allows units within 6 to reroll hits of 1. That's good. Advanced Guardian Drone says that each time a ranged attack targets the bearer, subtract 1 from the wound roll, so she's -1 to wound. Yes, that's also good. And Command Link Drone, if you use a stratagem on a Tower Empire unit within 6 inches, you roll a d6, and on a 5 up, you get a CP back. So also good, right? Like all those things, those are good. Yes. I like those. And so Shadowsun is her own thing. She's not a leader anymore. She, can't join stealth suits or anything like that, which is a little disappointing. But having her as her own thing and being able to, throw out a couple nice Fusion Blaster shots plus, save you some CP seems like she could do really well, positioned upboard with some other units. And she has Lone Operator, she has Stealth, so she's able to kind of be off to the side and be pretty well protected too. So she's offering some functionality and offering some functionality, some maneuverability, kind of a nice suite of traits here. So I think Shadowsun is worth looking at too. All right, so after all that, what did it mean? Well, the good news is that most things appear to have some role, right? Like the specifics about what's the most efficient, what's the best at any given thing, we have to work out. But as far as, the initial impression about what things do they make sense? Do they have some coherent strategy that is apparent to them? Yes, like most things seem like they could do a thing on the tabletop and do it with some level of competence. So that's good. It also means that there's multiple potential builds, right? You could lean into battlesuits. You could lean into infantry, right? You can have a couple different approaches here that seem apparent from the get-go. And so that's encouraging. Just what actually ends up being competitive, we have yet to see. Things that I'm excited about. I'm excited that Fish of Furies is clearly here, that there's an emphasis on infantry, right? Like we see like really clear synergy in our different Fire Warriors and Pathfinders, right? Like all the different infantry units seem to have some really juicy things about them, which is great. I'm really excited about the ability to potentially jump with multiple units, having a couple different crisis units with cold stars, having them be able to use strike and fade simultaneously seems like it could really annoy some opponents. And there's some really cool value added to some underutilized units like Piranhas with the drone harassment, stealth suits with the observers, Ghostkeels just being overall better than they probably ever have been, and Vespid having the ability to hop back into strategic reserves. All those things are really exciting for me. Things that I'm less excited about, things I'm concerned about, or things that we'll say this, that I'm keeping an eye on. Things like battlesuits being vehicles means that they're more vulnerable than they were before. I think taking shield drones on your battlesuits as much as possible is probably going to be a pretty standard thing, unless you have something else to do. Farsight is a massive disappointment. I'm going to be a little bitter about that, I think. He has some nice things about him, but it's not anywhere near where it would need to be to really deliver on the hype that was surrounding him. And then there's a lot of synergy in the codex, right? And that synergy means that errors or mispointing things has a much larger effect, because you're not just affecting that one unit, you're affecting all the things that rely on it as well. So there's kind of a compulsory synergy that's built into the index at this point, and that means that all the pieces need to fit together just right? Like if you have pieces that don't fit together correctly, it's going to mess the whole puzzle up. So we have to see. we have to keep our eye on that as well, and I guess respond dynamically to change. So overall, I think this looks really good, and the things that I'm excited about, I'm really excited about. So I can't wait to get my hands on some models and put them on the board in 10th edition. It's going to be great. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you want to pick up one of the Invasive Wargaming models before they become unavailable, head on over to the Invasive Wargaming Etsy store in the description below. Also, if you like this video, you should know that it is made possible by my kind sponsor, the Magnet Baron, as well as the excellent folks over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel, you can certainly hop on over there and join our community. Special thanks to Shifty, Durza, Everett Keller, Stephen Cowan, Jack Inacker, Jared Egler, and Scott Heater.